It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Al, I do want to talk a little bit more about gun control. We did discuss this last week, but I was struck a couple days ago by Senator Chris Murphy suggesting that actually, who has, as we all know, been one of the big advocates for gun control, suggesting that the time really was ripe for bipartisan support. As we all know, this all comes down to being on the desk of Mitch McConnell. We need 60 votes in the Senate for any meaningful legislation to be passed. And I just want to get a sense from both of you today on how optimistic you all are, and maybe in a way putting yourself in the position of advising President Biden and how to work with Mitch McConnell to get some kind of maybe even incremental progress on this issue.
I'm not overly optimistic that we're going to do anything in the Congress that is particularly meaningful. I do think it may be possible to do something very incremental, very much on the fringes of controlling guns, but I just can't be optimistic. I mean, as I said last week, I started my career working for Senator Joe Tidings in Maryland, and he was defeated for re-election in large part because he was such an avid supporter of gun control. I know President Biden has reached out to Senator McConnell, and and McConnell has responded by assigning John Cornyn, who's one of his chief lieutenants, to bipartisan negotiations, which include and are led really by Senator Murphy. But Mitch McConnell is a man of one purpose, and that's a political purpose. He made it very clear that he wanted to bring down President Obama, and he acted that way throughout the whole term, including much to the detriment of the country by not allowing a Supreme Court justice nominated by Obama to even go to hearings. And then, because it was the last year of the session, and then in 4 years later, in the last 2 months of the session, he rushed a Supreme Court justice appointed by President Trump more to his liking through. So I don't really think, and now his purpose is to save the Senate for the Republicans. So I don't really think it's out of the national interest that McConnell would agree to any gun control. I think he's probably looking at suburban voters in 4 or 5 swing states like Pennsylvania, Georgia, Wisconsin, Arizona, New Hampshire. All of those states are really pro-gun states, but suburban voters are going to be key voters, and they tend to be a little more for common sense gun restrictions. So here's what I expect. I expect they will have some sort of an agreement. There'll be some minor changes to expand background checks. I'm hearing there's going to be red flag legislation, but no serious legislation on anything like even raising the age you can get an assault weapon like an AR-15. No waiting period for an AR-15. Clearly no ban on AR-15s, and yet in mass shootings, AR-15s are the weapon of choice. So far this year, we've had 233 mass shootings. The last one last night in Tulsa, and like the culprit in Uvalde, the killer in Uvalde, This shooter got his AR-15 the day of the shooting. These mass shootings get wall-to-wall, 24-hour-a-day coverage on cable TV, on television. I mean, if anybody wants to get attention, all they probably think they have to do is go to the gun store and get an AR-15. But the problem really is that we have a much greater violence problem in this country. It's the tip of the iceberg. There were over 50 shootings in Chicago over the weekend with 9 fatalities. So far this year in Baltimore, to bring it a little closer to home, there have been 140 homicides. That's almost a homicide a day. And that's been the pattern for the last 4 years. This national crisis, I don't really think mumbling Mitch McConnell is serious about solving it. I hope he is. I hope he finally has a sense of conscience for the country. But we have to stop this carnage. We have to have a common sense policy about who can own a gun, what kind of guns can be out and about on the street, and limiting the purchase of assault weapons to people who are 21. You can't even rent a car till you're 25, and probably having a good long, maybe month-long waiting period. So for people who want to have an assault weapon, which really has no purpose except to kill people, it's a weapon of war, maybe that would be a good start.
Craig, that was a pretty pessimistic response from your colleague, Al Fromm. Last week, you were indicating, and I think it's quite true, that the NRA has lost a great deal of its clout, maybe opening the door for better, stronger legislation on this front. What's your take?
I'm not normally cynical by nature, but I have to say that Mitch McConnell has a very long track record of expressing the belief that something has to be done with regards to these gun issues, and then he promptly makes sure that no bill moves through the Senate. And I have a hard time believing he's going to move off of that traditional stance. And really, and I concur with Al, really, because Mitch McConnell is determined to do what his Republican colleagues need and what candidates need as he perceives it. And he's not going to do anything to put them at risk, in the hopes that he returns to majority leader, which is a world of difference in Washington, D.C., as opposed to the minority leader, which has relatively little power. It has some blocking power, but nothing like being the majority leader in the Senate. And that's what he optimizes for. Now, I heard an advocate for gun control on one of the interviews, the other day, and she was quite passionate. And she said, she thought something would happen because this is the time when people will step up and do the right thing. And the challenge, and in some ways, I think Al touches on it, that the right thing is not exactly clear. And it's basically what she's saying, and what others who use that phrase are saying, is do what I want done. The problem is some people want no automatic weapons. Some people want no more than kind of registration and background checks. Some people believe that somehow the Second Amendment should allow any of us to own any kind of gun we want. So in the minds of these constituents out there that McConnell has to sort out, what he's come to realize, I think, is one of the great kind of understandings in Washington. And that is, if you have people on several sides of the same issue, you can kind of do what you want, because you're never going to take one decision and please everybody. And so he's choosing to take a decision that's going to help those Republicans in close contests. And even though, and I said it last week, I still believe it, even though the NRA may be at one of its weakest moments in history, in these close races, they can make a difference. if there's any movement that's possible, I still think it might be some odd alliance between the pro-choice and advocates and the gun control advocates, because there are single issue candidates, single issue voters in both of those camps, and they might make a difference in some close races. But I wouldn't count on really Mitch McConnell and I think in the House, you've got the same equation. Republicans in the House are desperate to get back into a majority, and they're not going to do something that could be a threat to some of their candidates.
You know, Al, as we were preparing for today's program, it was startling to see that President Biden actually called Mitch McConnell reasonable. Given what you've just said, it strikes me as that also is very optimistic, but he clearly feels that he can work with Mitch McConnell. And he has a lot of evidence over the last 9 months to say that is not probably going to be the case. So why would he say that?
Because Mitch McConnell is the most powerful man in the United States Senate. What Craig said about the majority and minority leaders is usually true, except when Mitch McConnell is minority leader and we really have a 50-50 Senate. The Democrats are a more diverse party than the Republicans. So McConnell is in a stronger position really than Chuck Schumer. Schumer has the administrative responsibility for the Senate. He can schedule things and all that. But McConnell really decides what passes and what doesn't. So why would President Biden say that McConnell is a reasonable man? Because he's clearly not going to get anywhere by insulting him. And maybe he thinks there's a possibility for some very small incremental progress. And maybe that progress will lead to future progress in years to come, when people who make that what they think is a hard vote will see that it doesn't hurt them. But look, Craig makes the point about abortion and guns, gun control, and that may be true. But what we're really talking about here is an appeal to swing voters in suburban areas. And Roy Teixeira, who is one of the best political analysts I know, had a piece out this morning, and that shows how hard even that course would be, because he went through suburban areas, excuse me, in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and a number of other areas, and showed how really, the vote that is the swing vote are the white, college-educated suburbanites, but they're really in a minority. We tend to think of suburbanites as being more moderate, more college-educated, but the reality is, in all those suburban areas, still 2-to-1 working class whites to college-educated whites, and that probably doesn't bode well for gun control or making the fight over abortion as opposed to over choice. Now, but look, I just want to get back to where I was before. This is a national crisis, and what we really need is powerful leadership, presidential leadership, and somebody who's willing to take a lot of hits. Now, Biden is not in that position because the political environment for Democrats is so bad for this fall. But without leadership and a real campaign by the president to change these things, we're not going to get anywhere. And as a country, at some point, I just have to believe if the president could bring his party and maybe figure out some way to make the case in a strong enough way that the American people really don't want to see their neighbors shot up and killed every day.
Craig, you have the last word.
Well, I'll be brief, and I think I'm ratcheting up on cynicism here. My fear is that we're going to come through 2022, not with gun control. We're going to come through 2022 with more gun sales than we've seen probably in any calendar year in recent past. In fact, the only control that I've even heard about from one of my friends and who has firearms is it's hard to get ammunition. The ammunition is being stockpiled. And what this constant focus by the media, deservedly with the horrific things that are happening, but with this constant focus, you're getting more and more people who are simply buying weapons and buying ammunition. And it is a real national challenge. It does take leadership. You know, one of the things we've said here before, and I've always believed in, a president is either putting, you know, money in his political bank account or taking it out. And unfortunately, I'm afraid that Joe Biden doesn't have enough money in the account to take out enough to deal with this issue in 2022.
Well, we have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much indeed. We will see you next week.